Thanks for joining us inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Inside the Dancer's Studio is a program of the National Center for Choreography at the University of Akron as part of our Ideas in Motion initiative. This episode was recorded in the presence of a live audience in 2023. Today, we join Christy Bolingbroke, our Executive Artistic Director, in conversation with Brooklyn, New York-based interdisciplinary artist and the Artistic Director of Renegade Performance Group, André M. Zachery. Zachery is a 2016 New York Foundation for the Arts Gregory Millard Fellow in Choreography, and a 2019 Jerome Hill Foundation Fellow in Choreography. As a scholar, he speaks and writes on many topics, including Afrofuturism, Black cultural aesthetics, and technology in art and performance.
How or when did you become a choreographer?
I would say I've always had an interest in making, and I would always be eager to improvise during improvisation classes.
Okay.
When I was getting my BFA in the Ailey Fordham program, and so that was always a big part of how I liked to dance really, and then figuring out how I could put pieces together of these kind of what you were just speaking about, these ideas that I was kind of investigating. I didn't even, understand the word at that time, investigating. It was just more like, okay, cool, like, improvising on this, in this way. And then it was like, okay, but now I want to improvise or, do something over here. And then, I would say, well, how do I put those things together and, see what they felt like? And yeah, I would say it really started to become more of something I was like, I think I can maybe go into this for my senior choreographic project. I did two choreographies actually. I did a solo, and then I choreographed a duet on two other students. And back then you were only supposed to do one.
Overachiever.
Yeah, just a little bit. And the duet I had been working on over the summer. And so I kind of had that like pretty much good and set. And I was like tweaking it a little bit, but then the solo was something I was just like, let me really like get into this in a way that I was just like, like I want to pull this apart. And that one, I had some pretty good people that came around and would mentor me. I was mentioning earlier, like the choreographer Nathan Trice, who I worked with. I was also working with another choreographer, someone named Kwame Ross, a late Kwame Ross, now since passed, but they would give me some pretty good feedback on like what they saw and what they felt that I was kind of like trying to go for. And yeah, and so when I came to when it came to now submitting for the choreographies, I said, well, I have two projects, like, is that okay? And they were just like, well, let's just see one of them. And so I showed them, and they were like, oh, it's actually pretty good. Can we see the other one? And then I showed them. They were like, yeah, okay, great. You can do two on the concert. So
Nice.
Yeah, that's when I kind of really was just like, okay, choreography could be something that I really want to, pursue maybe a little bit sooner than later, I would say.
There's so many things just in hearing that snapshot of your journey, right? The idea of improvising, of staying ready, of not waiting for the invitation, and then when asked, saying like, well, what about this? I could do, both of these. But also along the way, the other choreographers and artists that you work with, that you surround yourself with, and creating a sort of community and this idea of agile development and feedback.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, you accepted our invitation to come teach as part of 21st Century Dance Practices.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
How would you define 21st Century Dance Practices?
That's such an important question, because 21st century dance practices is, as much as it is a push forward, it is now a recollecting and it offers, through various mediums, through our various technologies, an opportunity to actually look back in ways that we possibly hadn't had the means to do before. And so 21st century dance practices for me is also it is as much as it's an artistic, like this artistic stance, it's as much a societal statement on reshifting, our focus on like what dance is, where were like origins of dance in ways that are we're not as considered, and then I would say giving us the opportunity to really create a new value system on the emphasis that we place on, I would say, especially when it comes to like race and ethnicity and then cultural lineage in these, and being specific in these specific forms and how we can trace them. I think it's incredibly important. 21st century dance practices for me, I would say, as much as I was, given, formal dance training as well, which, I was lucky to receive, because I had a family that was very supportive of being in the arts. And that was just what it meant to be a well-rounded person, not just your academics. And you had to also understand the arts with music, dance. But I grew up in 90s hip hop culture, you know what I mean? And then in Chicago, like 90s hip hop and house, culture. Definitely not in the clubs. I was a kid, but like at school, on the street after school with your friends. And, that was, it wasn't that it was, outside, like looking back, I'm like, oh no, that was it. Like we were the culture in a very weird way, going to house parties and things like that we were able to go to. And so understanding how those sensibilities actually to me are really important in shaping 21st century dance practices. To me, more so than anything I learned in a formal dance class, respectively. Like I would rather take the principles I learned like in the house party or like the gym, the weekend gym parties, and those inform me way more. So,
well, and I love the notion that this moment is to redefine a system of values as well, because I also think in your work there is that sense of tradition of rich African diasporic culture, which a lot of times people may connote is like old. But then in the 21st century, it doesn't just mean shiny and new and now we're going to be doing digital everything.
Right, yeah.
But rather, what's at the nexus of all that we've come before? What do you want to carry forward, those sensibilities? What do you want to let go of? And then how do you keep it relevant in a new context and a new time moving forward? How do you work with technology in your work?
Technology is something I started to work with, I would say around 2000. I became interested in it in 2005, 2006, when I began working with a company in Philadelphia called Miro. That was kind of more performance art and experimental performance company that was actually using technology within their work. Wow. Even then, I was just like, wow, this is this is
like Web 1.0.
Yeah, like literally. And the directors, Tobin Raphael and Amanda Miller, they were asking some pretty interesting questions with technology. So I was like, okay, this is this is definitely like up, up my alley in what I kind of really want to look at with work. And I would say it was when a friend asked me, because I had a pretty, back then, like the digital cameras, some were like pretty good. And I remember I got a deal on one.
They were not in your phone.
They were not in your phone, yeah. So this is back then, like even like 2000, when the iPhone dropped, what was that, like, I guess 2009 or something, like that was a big deal.
I think I had like the Canon Digital Elf.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I had a Sony, I forgot which one. But it was pretty good. And I was just like, wow, I can do some like amazing things with this and like play with like the FPS. And a friend was doing an audition and needed a reel, and they knew I had a good camera. They were like, what do you think we can do? I was like, well, why don't we just go out on the street and we can see what we can do? And so I was just playing with the camera with him, and I was just like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this is pretty dope. And then, we took the footage back, and and that was gonna be. And I remember I had saved up a lot of money, and I had got a Mac for the first time, and I was just like, wow, all right. So I had never used iMovie before. After about 2 months of having it, and so I was like, okay, this is gonna be a first time like really editing video. And we pulled in the footage, and I realized I could do so much with that footage. Like with filters, I was like, oh, there's something you can slow it down. And I was like, yo, what do you want to try this? And that's when I realized, I was like, oh, this is pretty amazing. I can extend what I'm doing, in the physical sense, in the dance space, and I can push it even further in a digital way. And so,
well, choreographing through the digital way.
Yeah.
Choreography is about playing with time.
Yeah, exactly.
And manipulating these different elements. And so finding another tool instead of just relying on the bodies in front of you.
And so with that, but also being able to use the bodies that were in the space with me or in front of me, and then almost have another way of seeing what they were. So meaning that what we can see now, of course, mainly with at the proscenium, it's a very frontal and forward way of looking. But it was like, wow, I can actually position the camera maybe on like this downward angle behind them, and then all of a sudden, it's going to create this entirely new perspective of their body moving in relationship to, living in New York. It was like, wow, to like this architecture that maybe is up there. And then it's just like, oh, whoa, they're actually trying to relate to something out of, let's say, like the line of sight. And that's when I was just like, okay, this is probably going to be like where the field is going. And so I started to really investigate a lot more choreographers that were doing work. I even was trying to, as much as I could, like, read books. And I knew other choreographers like Bill T. Jones had done work, with a lot of technology, such as, I think, what was this piece? I think it was ghost catching, I believe. And I know some others, but I started to like actually now like look at it more seriously, and figure out like, what do I want to say? And so then, I was a big sci-fi nerd, and I was also pretty I was into comic books and things like that, and a lot of my crew was, and I had a lot of my crew were also like writers and musicians, visual artists, and already around that time. So many people were delving and kind of re-emerging with Afrofuturist thought, with writers such as like Greg Tate, and that was just a part of like the community in New York, and then by the time I say like around 2012, late 2011, I started to really kind of ask myself like, how do I begin to really place and consider dance in this relationship with Afrofuturism? Because, really up until that point, no one had been asking that question, really. Like music was already like well beyond, when we think of people like Alice Coltrane and Sun Ra, literature, sure, people like, Octavia Butler, N.K. Jemisin, Samuel Delaney, visual art, film. And so it was interesting that I was just like, wait a minute, there has been no real consideration of like dance and the body, the form that actually, when they're talking about the blackness, this is it. I'm like, oh. And so I was asking questions like, well, is anybody else doing it? I was like, surely I'm not the only one. And then people like Makeda Thomas, who's the director of Dance Institute Trinidad and Tobago, she was doing some work. And I was like, okay, yeah, I see you, Makeda. And Makeda was like, yep, I see you, little bro doing the thing. But it wasn't that many others. And then I met people like Monster Black and Manchild Black, fellow choreographer in New York. And I was like, oh, whoa, they're doing some like really like sick stuff, you know what I'm saying? And so it slowly started to like, once I started asking those questions, people started revealing themselves, and I was like, oh, okay, there's a few people here, so.
Yeah. Well, and so much of that, I think you're so dead on with, dance has been a little bit slower to embracing technology, Afrofuturism in everything that they do. I think sometimes because of how the field is working on a project basis, it tends to surface with like, this project is going to have the shiny, the new, the bells and whistles.
Yeah.
Whereas what I hear that you're doing is like, this is about longevity. And it's like, how do you pick up these tools and this way of thinking that works with your latest project today, but is something that you'll continue to work with for 10, 15, 20 years, as long as you want to make dances.
Yeah.
The technology aside, we've got a lot of, students that also want to dance. What do you look for in dancers?
I honestly, I look for hunger.
Hunger.
Yeah. I mean,
Tell us more.
I mean, if there is, for those that have been taking class with me, I hope they've seen, like, I can put some steps together. Hopefully, like, I really try and do it in a way that's intentional and not just haphazard. It's just like, okay, wait a minute. I know this momentum's going here. And so sometimes I'm saying, okay, how do I complete that momentum to come into something else? Or is there an intentional way of like taking that centrifugal work and then maybe releasing it through the backspace in a way that might not be expected? And so sometimes I deliberate on that a lot. And then I just want to see people do it, right? And it's more about, this space really being a lab, when, coming up, like breaking and like learning how to footwork. Sometimes you would just mess up and I think that, and then going back to what we were talking about, 21st century dance practices, right? So in that space, when you were learning how to break and, and footwork or do the thing, there were, back then, like of course you had like people that were like experienced, but when you were a kid, I mean, no one was a master teacher. Like you were just learning it and then some, definitely some youth were better than others. They were older than you. They were like, oh man. And so you were looking at them like, man, how did they do that? And so then you're trying it and then you don't quite do what they do, but then you do something else and you figure it out. And they're like, oh, you just figured out something on your own. That's your style, right? And you're like, oh, right. That's okay, cool. And then you're there like, oh, okay. So while they were doing like this, you're like, added something in that respect. And that is part of, and to me, that represents to me a healthy continuum. And so then in the spaces, as much as I do have to impart and bestow with, my own experience and knowledge, I love seeing when someone is just like, oh, they did that. I'm like, oh, what was that? That was cool. Like, let's put that in there. And then, because then that lets me know, they're trying something or in a way that is not trying to be perfect either. Because I mean, I'm not really interested in that. I mean, most of, you're here in university, so that means, someone has invested a lot of time and energy and money for you to get good techniques. So that probably means, you know what I mean? Like, meaning the easy part is doing 3 pirouettes. That's actually the easy part of dance. That's not hard. The hard part of dance is taking this, as you're saying, taking this idea or this exploration of working and then being like, oh, you're doing something wicked with that. Like, I've never even considered doing it in that way. Okay, now how can we take that way of doing it and now pull it forward in a way that's like, oh, you know what I mean? It's like, I can't help but to take, like that energy you have with it and now because you're like, I need that in the room. Because now that's going to push me as a creator.
Well, and it's bigger than, just having the ideas in your head, and then, or fitting them on your body, and then fitting them on other people's bodies, but it makes space for everyone's uniqueness.
Yeah.
And hearing you describe what that is to look for, the dancers and bodies and people that you want in the room also reminds me of what you told us about working on your senior projects and creating that community where there is a sort of feedback mechanism.
Yeah.
Almost maybe like a cipher too, as a part of the spirit. And so my last question, as you've been surrounding yourself with people and listening, and you respond both to the dancers you're working with as well as the choreographers you've worked for, what is maybe a favorite or best piece of advice that you've ever been given in navigating a creative career that you might share with us today?
I was actually just speaking about this with my collaborator last night, and we were speaking about knowledge and advice he had heard from kind of a global mentor in Chicago, the writer Haki Madhubuti, and Baba Haki was saying, and I might get this incorrect, Ayende might be more specific. You need to have courage. You need to have incessant curiosity, and you do need to have a conviction to some type of principles in your life. It's interesting because I know, especially as careers as dancers, it seems like, oh man, like this company or the name of like this space seems like that is the goal to get to and to land, and then that's it. And for some people, yeah, that is. And then for some others, it's like, oh, I'm here, and now actually maybe I've done 5 to 6 years, and now I'm actually ready to ask new questions. And then with that, we don't create work within a vacuum, usually not just for ourselves. Yeah. And our work does serve, it serves people in ways that we might never expect. It does seem corny, but there are people that actually are inspired by you making the choice and the decision to pursue something that that you love to do, hopefully, and being in the space, moving with others, by yourself. It actually inspires people in ways sometimes we may never know, and sometimes the most meaningful projects for us are the ones that we've met all of the goals that we've set up for ourselves, even if that didn't necessarily, let's say, get, uber wide acclaim.
All the grants or sell all the tickets.
Actually, sometimes like those projects where, even like smaller projects, that's been worth it. And then I would say one of the most meaningful ways that I know I execute as an artist is sometimes when I'm able to, especially like with my technology skills or even choreography, if I'm working on a project, if it's in service of someone else, if I'm not the lead on it, or if I'm like, you know what, actually I want to take my work in support of what you're doing. Sometimes I get the most fulfillment with that, with collaborating and saying like, oh, like this idea you have, like, could I explore it here? And like, would you like to, invest? Can I do something with that and like in support of what you're doing? And sometimes artists is like, oh yeah, I didn't even know that was something that you want to do, like with like a film or like some music, or like or some projections, and I'll do something, and they'll be like, whoa, like yeah, can we bring that in? And then all of a sudden that turns into like a real relationship over time that gives us an extension through our artistic partnership, and that then creates longevity for my own career, right? So that it's not just about, oh, when's the next, grant or gig or choreography coming from, but you've created it for yourself again through these relationships with the skills that you have been building over time. So yeah.
Well, there's so much in that too. I wanted to reiterate the idea of courage, incessant curiosity, and conviction of principles. And then as you explained how it may show up, it's this like ever-changing definition of what success or satisfaction may look like. And similar to the body, right? Like who you were as a mover at 15 is going to be different at 25, is going to be different at 35.
It's going to be different at 40.
Welcome to your 40s. Yeah.
It's going to be different at 40. Oh,
and so we are not fixed entities. So in navigating this creative career, to be able to stay curious and not still seeking, but I want this definition of success, when you're like, well, but that's the kind of thing that you did in your 15s and 20s and working with that. And so, yes, some of it is, but how do you find new ways to get there as well? And I love that, because that is another thing. Dance is in a constant dialogue with the body. Yeah. For sure.
Oh, yes. Big facts when you say that, because that relationship to embracing, as you're saying, the shifts in our own bodies, and for me, doing that in myself has completely expanded my empathy for seeing, like, okay, what are other bodies, like, especially those, whether they're students, collaborators, whoever is like in the room with me, or if I'm seeing work on stage, it's just like, right. You don't know what the story of someone's body is, right? And so the incredible vulnerable, position that everyone comes to be in the studio, it is to really be, held with respect and honor, and then you do your best to like make sure that, like you say, it's held with care. You challenge yourself as much as possible. I realize I'm like, wow, I can't. Even 7 years ago, I'm like, wow, I could do that. I can still do it, but now it's just a little bit different, and it's just like, okay, all right, that's what it is. And
that's another sort of feedback mechanism.
Yeah, it is.
In dialogue with your own body.
And it's a beautiful space of humility. I'll say that. And so I know, as speaking as a non-disabled person who then is looking at what that means to be able to even navigate space in a certain way, and then what does it mean for me to then make to make these considerations of like, now what does it mean when disabled persons are in the room, disabled dancers are in the room with me? How does that then shift? Because then over time, body shift. Yep. And those relationships to ability, are now very, have variance. So it's something that I'm grateful I put myself in positions to learn and to constantly shift of like, what I thought was fixated is definitely not. So
excellent. In a position to learn. Please join me in thanking André Zachery.
Thank you, Christy.
Yes.
Inside the Dancers Studio live series is supported by NCCAkron, the University of Akron, the University of Akron Foundation, and the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture Series in the Arts. Our podcast program is produced by Jennifer Edwards. James Sleeman is our editor. Theme music by Flaco Torres. Cover art by Micah Krause. Transcription by Arushi Singh. Special thanks to the team on the ground in Akron, Ohio. To learn more about NCCAkron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCCAkron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching for Inside the Dancers Studio. Thanks so much for listening, and stay curious.